Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to this video lesson. We're going to talk about functions, but specifically we're going to be dealing with flowcharts to help us translate from a flowchart to a C# program. So you'll notice over here that I have the beginning part of my flowchart, and Visio is a great program to create flowcharts. It's got all the various shapes. You just simply drag them and drop them into here, and then you can create your flowchart. So in this particular flowchart, you'll notice that we start over here. We're going to have some declarations. We're going to get the user input, and then we have this special rectangle, which looks like it has two vertical lines over here, two vertical lines over here. So this is what we're going to use for a function call. It says subprocess, but the idea is we call a function, it does something, and then we come back and then we finish the program. So when we call this function called display even numbers, I put that on page 2. That's this part over here, display even numbers. Now how does this work? Well, first of all, you've got to give me a whole number, and we're going to call that usernum parameter. And then as you can see over here, there's it says let counter be a whole number. Well, we know that that's integer. That's an integer in C#, and it looks like we're initializing it to 0. What about this shape? Well, this shape can either be an if statement or a while statement, a selection structure or a repetition structure. And in this case, I can see that it's a repetition structure, a while statement. Why? Because notice the pattern here. Oh, sorry, we're taking this path over here. Notice the pattern. So if this thing is true, we'd go here, and then we are led right back to the top of this diamond. So since we are doing this type of behavior, that means that that's a while statement. Finally, when this is done, we just simply go to the end of the function. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to use functions to display even numbers using this flowchart, and I want to show you how, if you're given a flowchart, how you can create a program based on this. This is the answer right here. This is the answer. So what we need to do is to translate to Visual Studio. So let me go ahead and create a new project, and C#, Windows Forms application. So this is going to be C#, and we are talking about functions, specifically with flowcharts, and we're going to display an even number, or even numbers. I have to be careful here because I can't type in too many letters. There's a limitation here, so I'm trying to be very abbreviated. All right, so let's go ahead and drag and drop some stuff. Now, I'm not giving you any additional user information or user requirements or software requirements in terms of what this thing will look like. We just want to display even numbers. All right, so I suppose that I'll need a button, label, and also a text box. I'm going to select all these, and I'm going to make them 12 points. So I'll type in 12, enter. And let's go ahead and move the label to the upper left-hand corner. And for the text property, we'll say enter, well, let's see here, enter a number, or how many numbers? How many even numbers? Because that's what this is all about, right? Displaying even numbers. But how many do you want to display? Well, we'll ask the user how many even numbers they want to display. And then we'll have a button over here. And then I'll just simply take this label, copy and paste it. Let's modify it a little bit. We'll give it a auto size of false, so that way we can resize it, and a border style of fixed single. Let me go ahead and reposition this. Something like that looks pretty good. Yeah, looks pretty good. I want the text to be centered, so I'm going to go over here to the text align property and select this guy over here where it says top center. And then it'll fill in from there. Actually, no, let's just make it middle center. Like that. You can set it up to however you want. And then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the text that's currently in here because it's supposed to be blank when I first start the program. Let's go ahead and reduce the size of the form. Let's get rid of the minimize and the maximize box. And instead of form, for the text property, we'll say display even numbers. Something like that. All right, so let me save my work. I'm going to get rid of the toolbox and also the properties panel. Oh, what am I doing? I've got to give this thing a not only do I have to give it a name, I get to give all these guys names, but I didn't finish the text property here, so we'll just say submit. Something like that. All right, so good thing I caught myself there. This is going to be txt user num. This guy over here will be btn submit. And then finally we have LBL result. Now, I didn't give you any type of instruction to do this. This is going to be up to you now. Future programs, I'm going to say, okay, just create the graphical user interface, and it'll be up to you of how you want to design it. But just note that you'll still use the Hungarian notation. You'll still use common sense when it comes to your naming of either text boxes, buttons, or labels. And so I think you're all set for that. Okay, let me go ahead and save, double click on submit so I can go into the code area. And now I'm over here in this particular procedure. Now I'm going to go back over here to the flowchart and let's see what we're supposed to do. Well, first of all, we're supposed to create this function. So let me start off by creating the function that I'm going to end up calling display even numbers. Okay, so let's go over here. I'm still inside the form class, that is, and we'll say this is a void function. Display, what is it? Display even numbers. Okay, display even numbers. Parentheses, what am I supposed to give you? I'm supposed to give you a whole number, so that's an integer, called user num parameter. So int user num parameter. Open and close curly braces. Okay. So you may be asking, hey, Professor Solis, how'd you know it was a void? Well, when I take a look at the function, it doesn't return anything. So it gives me the name of the function, parameters. Now, if it did return anything, it'd say, returns an integer called, whatever that happens to be. But in this case, it doesn't, so therefore this thing is a void function. It says let counter be a whole number set to 0. Okay, let counter be a whole number, so that's an integer. And we're calling this counter, and we're going to give it the initial value of 0. That takes care of this rectangle right here. By the way, what is that? Well, that's really a declaration, so I'll put declarations. Maybe we only have one declaration, and that's okay. Over here, I have to interpret what that diamond is. Now, that diamond could be an if statement, or the diamond could be a while statement. And since it goes down, and over here and back into the diamond, then I can see this pattern, and that's going to be a while statement. So while the counter is less than user num parameter. So we'll say while the counter is less than or equal to, is that what it said? No, just less than. While the counter is less than user num parameter. So we'll say user num parameter. While that's the case, let me go ahead and put an open and close curly braces. While that's the case, what are we going to do? And that's true. Print, counter, and a space. Okay, so print means we're going to output something. Well, for us, outputting something means placing something on this label, which we called, what do we call it? LBL result. All right, so what does it say? Print, counter, whatever the value of counter is, and a space. Okay, so we're going to take the result label, and we're going to update it. So we're going to take the old value of that, and I'm going to concatenate that with whatever the value of counter is, and then I'm also going to concatenate a space, because that's what the flowchart says to do, right? Print, counter, and a space. Now, let's make a couple corrections here. This is a string. This also is a string, but counter is not. Counter is an integer. So really what I should do is I should say convert dot to string, and then whatever the value of counter is. Close that. So I'm concatenating the old value that's currently here. By the way, this is initially blank, right? Let's take a look at this guy. See, it's blank. So we're taking what this old value is, which is blank. We're going to concatenate that with whatever the counter is, which is 0. And then we're going to concatenate a space to that. Now that you've done that, what else does it say to do? Increment counter by 2. Okay, so we increment the counter by 2, like this. Increase it by 2. All right, so now that we've increased it by 2, notice what happens. We go back to the beginning of the while statement and ask, shall we do this again? So that means that there's no more code to write after this. And then, in fact, when this thing is false, notice that we are finished with this function. So what does this function do? It displays even numbers. So notice that I picked a name that is descriptive of what the function does. And you know what? In the old days of programming, it used to be that you would have to abbreviate something like this. You would have to say like dis even nums. You try to keep it at 8 characters or something like that. Well, we don't do that anymore, right? In this new age of programming, it's okay to be verbose, and so I tend to use words, several words, in fact, to describe what this does, because for me, readability is probably the most important attribute of a program. Some future programmer or myself will be looking at this code perhaps at a future time and wonder, what the heck is this thing doing? Well, if I have a very descriptive function name, well, then that solves my problem. This is a readable program. I know exactly what the user is doing or what the programmer is intending to do. And then, of course, if I have comments, now, declarations, that's not such a sophisticated comment, but at least it shows me the section here. But sometimes I'll have a comment that's like maybe 3 or 4 or 5, maybe lines long, because I feel, or think rather, not feel, I think that in the future it may be confusing to understand what a chunk of code is going to do. So I'll help myself or some future programmer out by letting them know what I'm going to do. Okay? So maybe we could write a comment over here. So what does this thing do? It displays even numbers on the GUI, the graphical user interfaces label. Right? Something like that. Let me go ahead and save. Okay, so we're finished with the function. Let me go back over here to page 1, and let's go ahead and work on the main program, which is basically when the user clicks the submit button. If you wanted to, we could say our initial comments. We could display our initial comments like declarations, get user input, calculation, and then finally output. I gotta fix this word right here, and like this. Okay, just get a quick drink here. All right, now let's go ahead and take care of our declaration. So over here, it says create a whole number, which we know means integer in C#. And we're going to create a variable name called user input. So over here, we'll just put int user input. Now, it says read user input. This is typically what you do in a flowchart. You have a rhombus, and if you're going to get values or if you're going to display values. So if you're going to read or write, put another way, then you use the rhombus for that. And in this case, it's saying basically get the user input. Okay, so that would go over here then. The user input is going to be, now let me convert, .to int 32, whatever is inside of the text box, .text. So we've been doing this before. Get the text information from the text box and convert that into a number. Well, now that I've gotten, by the way, did it tell you to do that? No, this is going to happen as a result of experience. You would translate this into this, and it's just going to take experience. Once you've done it a couple times and you realize in C++ and C#, this is how you input data from a text box, or in C++ you would do it in a different way, or Visual Basic, or whatever the language that you're using. Right? You're acting as a translator. All right, the next thing we're supposed to do is we're supposed to call a function called display even numbers. All right, so I can put that over here in the calculate. In fact, let's call this the calculation and output section. So I'll just simply do this. We'll say the calculation and output section over here. And what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to be calling this function, display even numbers. Okay, so we'll call display even numbers. Now, in order for display even numbers to work, you need to do something. We got to give you something. And over here, what is it saying? Well, you're going to have to give me a whole number, and that's basically going to be the user number. Okay, so I have that, so I'll just give you user input. And that's it for the main program. This is it right here. it's going to call this function and display even numbers based on the user input. So let me save my work. Let's run the program and see what happens. All right, so we're compiling it. Here it is. How many even numbers? Okay, so let's say that I type in 5. 1, 2, 3. Uh-oh, that's not good. Only 3 even numbers? And first of all, let me see here. Let me try this like this. 6. Oh, look at that. 1, 2, 3. Oh, you know what happened? It's taking the old output and adding to it. So if I just did 1 over here, it would just give me that 1. So what I've got to do is, as an author, I've got to modify my flowchart. So let me go back over here. Oops, sorry. And modify my flowchart. What I've got to do when I start my program is I've got to clear the display. Right? I've got to clear this guy here so it doesn't display the old values. And then second, I got to find out what's going on with my flowchart here, because it looks like it's not displaying. I entered 5 and it gave me 3 values. Why is that? Well, okay, so let's troubleshoot this. Let's take a look at it, see what happens. Well, first of all, let me just remind myself here. So I think I typed in the number 5, and only 3 even numbers are displayed. Why is that? So we have a logical error with our flowchart. Let's see if we can figure it out. All right, so in this case, what I'm doing is I'm letting the counter be equal to the number set to 0. So 0 is less than the user number, which was 5 in our case, right? So 0 is less than 5, fine. Then the counter increments by 2, so then it's 3. Is 3 less than 5? Yes. Okay, and then after that, 3 is going to be I'm sorry, we started at 0, so it's going to go to 2, and then it's going to go to 4. Is 4 less than 5? Yes. So what's happening is this. My counter is going to be 0, then it's going to be 2, and remember the user number is 5. Then it's going to be 2, then it's going to be 4, and then it's going to be 6. Okay, 6 is not less than 5, so it stops the program. Did you notice that we looped 3 times? So we went from 0 to 2 to 4, and remember the user number is 5 in our example. So that's 3 times. That's why we only got 3 numbers. So I have a logical problem here. I need the counter to count separately than what I have in terms of an even number. Now, that may or may not make sense to you in terms of an introductory programmer. So don't worry about it. If that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. That's something that perhaps maybe an intermediate or advanced student would understand. The idea that I want you to understand is how to get a flowchart and churn that into workable code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up a little bit. I'm going to make this a little bit taller because I need to add I need to amend this. What I really need to say is, okay, yeah, so counter could be 0, that's fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let even num be a whole number set to 0 as well, because 0 will be our first even number, and then we're going to increment that to 2 and so forth and so on. Okay, well, if I did that here, then over here where it says increment counter, that's not right. Not by 2, we're going to increment that by 1. Then I'm going to say increment even num by 2, which makes sense. If it's 0, then it should be 2, and if it's 2, it should be 4, and if it's 4, it should be 6, so forth and so on. So I'll just make this a little bit taller, and that's fine. Whoops, I don't mean to do that. That's fine like that. Okay, so there's a difference between syntactical errors and logical errors. Logical errors are dangerous. As you just saw, this led to an inaccurate result. So that's why typically you have several programmers looking at your code or at your flowchart, making sure that the logic of it is correct. And in my case, it wasn't. So it's just something to keep an eye out on. Okay, so now let's make these adjustments. So first of all, it looks like I'm going to have to introduce a variable called even num. It's a whole number, which is an integer, and we're going to set that to 0. Okay, so I'm going to go back over here, and let's see here. So instead of, oops, sorry, go down to my function over here, display even integers, yeah, and we're going to create even number, set it to 0. Okay, so even number and we'll set that to 0. Okay. Now another thing you're supposed to do is, oops, you're supposed to increment even number by 2 and increment counter by 1. So over here, we'll increment counter by 1, and even number, we will increment that by 2. All right, so let me save my work, run the program, and let's see if these logical changes are an improvement to our program. So I entered the number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers, that's good. But, uh-oh, look at what happens. 0, 1, 2, 3, those aren't even numbers. Why is this happening? Oh, look at this. This thing is saying display the results of the counter to the label. Well, that's just simply going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a counter, right? From 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to display the results of the even number. Okay, so let's close this. Another logical problem here. So let's go back over here. Is there something that I need to do here? It says print counter and a space. Nope, that's no longer correct based on our little adjustment over here. What this should say is print even num and a space. So this is a little bit more wording, so I'll just open this up a little bit. Something like that. Let's see, can I get this out a little bit? Perfect. And maybe this line over here a little bit more. Good. Print even number and a space. All right, so I got some saving to do here. Here we go. And now we'll go back over here. And instead of printing out the value of counter, or sending out the value of counter, we're going to send the value of even number out. Save my work. Start. Let's see what happens now. So I type in 5 because I want to see 5 even numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 even numbers. Looks good. Now we're going to have a problem. Check this out. If I type in 2, then I would just expect to see 0 and 2. But notice I didn't clear the output. So it's taking the old output and just concatenating that. So I need to make an adjustment. All right, so back over here in my flowchart, when I first start my program, I need to clear the display. So I think what I'll do is I'll just simply move all this down a little bit. Move it down a little bit like that. And I need to insert something into here. So I'll just take this guy, I'll copy and paste it. And what this needs to say is something like clear the output. Now that's a very general statement, but for us in C#, we know that means clear the label. So I'll have the arrow go from here to here. Move this back into place. And then I'll have an arrow go from here to here. Because remember, this is a flow chart, so we're showing how we are flowing through this program. And in this case, after the declarations, clear the output, then read, and so forth and so on. So let's clear the output after the declarations. Okay, so I go back over here. Let's go to our main program over here. Here's the declarations, and I'll just simply have a comment over here that says clear the output, which for us simply means LBL result.text. We're going to set that to blank. That's really going to clear the output. Let's see what happens. Let's save our work, run the program. I'll type in the number 5, submit. Yep, good. 5 even numbers. Let's type in now 2, say for example. So notice that we cleared the output, and then we're displaying just 2 even numbers. How about if I said give me 20 even numbers? That's okay because we are going to simply word wrap and go to the next line. Let me just make sure that I have 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Yep, and then we just double check that they're all even. And it looks like they are all even. Yep, looking good. Looking good. All right, so the importance of this video lesson is showing, first of all, how really important logical operations make your program work. And illogical operations or steps or what have you do not make your program work. So this was a good way of seeing how we can take this flowchart, translate to a program, in this case C#, but also If there are logical problems with our flowchart, we can just simply make adjustments here. And so now, once I've made those logical adjustments, then I can go from here to here. Now, Apple and Microsoft, they suggest that you should be spending time doing this kind of stuff here. About 70 to 80% of your programming endeavor should be this. What is the idea of your program? What is the top level? And actually, to be quite honest with you, my flowcharts are a little bit more specific in this case. In the workforce, my work charts used to be much, much more general, because that's what you're doing when you're creating flowcharts. You have the bird's eye perspective. And then when you're actually writing the code, that's the worm's eye perspective. So the bird's eye perspective says, I can see the trees, I can see the river that's cutting through the forest. But the worm's eye perspective says, I can see the nitty-bitty bits of grass and the dirt. Right? So it's the code level when you're at the worm's eye perspective, and it's like this idea level when you are at the bird's eye perspective. Okay, so get Visio if you can. As a student at Citrus, you should be able to get Visio through the Imagine Citrus web store based on the email that you received. It's a great program for being able to design flowcharts. This is a function. This is how you call a function, right? This is how you write a function. And then you just simply follow the logical flow of the program, and you are translating into CSharp in this case. And I didn't say anything about this graphical user interface. You're now ready to develop your own graphical user interfaces and then implement the flowcharts to design whatever it is that you're supposed to be designing. And that is it. So this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.